Good job. Let us share screen. Okay, good. Well, welcome. We're going to continue our discussion of unification meditation, experiencing oneness with God by reciting the Shema. And we'll also continue our study of mindfulness. And as a special treat, I'm going to give you an introduction to a fascinating interview with a scientist who has studied mindfulness. And I'll summarize that and give you some highlights before we meditate. Okay, so just as a review, we've explored these Jewish meditation techniques so far: the Amidah, Hit Bodhidut, Ruach HaKodesh, or enlightenment, mantra meditation, contemplation meditation, visualization meditation, and now unification meditation. As you can see, one of the major lessons of this class is meditation, up to very recent times comparatively, was essential and at the core of Jewish spiritual living. And for a number of different factors, it has been sidelined. And one thing we're trying to do is bring it back into the middle of the field. Here's the highlight of mindfulness from a scientific point of view. As I mentioned, we'll get to that before the meditation of tonight. Okay, let us continue with what Rabbi Kaplan is telling us about what he's calling unification meditation, experiencing oneness with God by reciting the Shema. So one thing that we're understanding from Rabbi Kaplan is that for you and me and most other people on the planet, connecting with God, experiencing oneness with God seem like very highfalutin concepts, and it's hard to relate to. But Rabbi Kaplan appreciates that, and the way he writes, it's pretty clear that he's achieved it. And one of the things he's teaching us is that you got to do it, you got to experience it, you've got to just do the meditation, then you know what he's talking about. It's not something that can be rationally, logically, conceptually understood. And he keeps pointing that out. Why? It's because we don't you can't conceptualize about God. What we understand about the real God is that you can't describe him. And at the same time, we have a very close relationship. We say he's my God. This indescribable being is my God. So just as Bhante teaches us when we talk about mindfulness, you have to get below the conceptual part of your brain and not analyze it, not think logically, and just grasp it with your intuition, with your sixth sense, whatever you want to call it, subconscious. And then you understand it. You truly understand it. It's just not logical. Okay. He keeps saying that over and over again. And it just happens to be what Bhante and many other master meditators say. Same thing. Okay. So let us continue. He's going to start talking about love, and love being one of those things that you understand in this manner of subconsciously, of intuitively, of feelings-wise. That's paralogical, paraconceptual. He says the following: the most powerful expression of will is love. This is also an integral part of the Shema. Every Hebrew letter has a numerical value corresponding to its position in the alphabet. The value of Echad, which is Aleph, Chet, Daled, the Hebrew word for one, is 13, 1 plus 8 plus 4. This, however, is the numerical value of Ahava, Aleph, Hey, Vet, Hey, 1 plus 5 plus 2 plus 5, the Hebrew word for love. Okay, so he does the gematria type stuff of looking at the numerical values. Okay, it's it's a nice little connector. Okay, but obviously he doesn't bank his entire approach on utilizing numbers to make his point, which is good. There's more meat in the bones than numbers provide. Love is the power that breaks down barriers and unifies opposites. Two people who are deeply in love become one. The Torah says, a man shall leave his father and mother and attach himself to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. That's from Breshit. But the love and unity between God and man is greater than any possible between man and woman because there's no flesh involved. That's one reason why. Okay, so he makes a really interesting point. When we start entering the arena of talking about love, we start to get an idea of what unification is. Why? Because when you love someone, you transcend the differences and you connect kind of on the similarities, but more importantly, you connect on a deeper level. Okay, so that's a really good use. That's a really good idea. If we understand love from that point of view, we understand a little bit more about unification. So how does this love idea, what bearing does that have on the Shema and unification meditation? Well, as he pointed out, love is part of the Shema. Here we go. There are a number of prayers or blessings that surround the Shema when it is said as part of the morning service. The last words before the Shema itself are, "Blessed are you, Adonai, who chose his people Israel in love." Therefore, the word immediately before the Shema is the word love, in the context of a blessing that speaks of the love that God has for all his people. Okay, now that's kind of interesting from another point of view. All right, so first of all, he's making a connection. He's showing how love is a unifying force, that love is packaged with the Shema. And what's also interesting as a side point, he just said that love helps people transcend their differences and connect. Well, there is no greater difference than between God and the creator and his creation, between God and us. So God saying God loves us is in a way of saying that God is using love to transcend the incredible differences between him and us. So it shows the power of it. Immediately after the Shema is the commandment, you shall love your God, your Lord, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. That's what, now we're in the Shema. And that's love pops up again. This commandment speaks of the love that we must have for God. Therefore, the Shema is placed between two loves, God's love for us and our love for God. Both of these loves suggest the unity to be found in the Shema. We're transcending our humanness to try to connect with the parahuman, and he, so-called, is transcending his parahumanness to connect with the human. That's like a mind-boggling idea. That's a very essential Jewish idea. The Shema can be said as a prayer or as a declaration of faith, and it is said as such by Jews all over the world. But if the words are said very slowly, and if a person prepares himself mentally, the Shema can be an extremely powerful meditation. We are right here. Indeed, the Torah itself prescribes the Shema be said twice daily, and it seems highly probable that this was originally prescribed as a short daily meditation for all Israel. The technique consists in saying the words very slowly in a manner very similar to that of using the Amidah for a meditation. Remember, the first Jewish meditation that we studied was the Amidah, the Shemona Esrei. And he mentioned, Rabbi Kaplan kind of clocked it based on his knowledge of how Chazal, how the sages meditated. And he figured out that roughly it took the composers of the Amidah an hour to say that prayer, and they said one word approximately every 7 seconds. That's the pace. That's the pace that or the sages who were great meditators. That's the pace that they said the Shema in. So Rabbi Kaplan is now saying, and similarly, we can take a similar approach to saying the Shema. Now, obviously, you can go for 7 seconds between words right off the bat, but consistency is always important. If you want to do this, then pick an interval, pick a pace that you can stick with, and make it work, and then you'll get better and better. Right. So in the Amidah, as noted before, the prescribed rate was approximately one word every 7 seconds. The Shema can be said even more slowly. Well, there's only 3 parts of the Shema, as opposed to all the blessings, the 19 blessings of the Shemona Esrei. You can dwell on each word for as long as 15 or 20 seconds, or with experience even longer. During the silences between words, let the meaning of each word penetrate your innermost being. And again, he's a real proponent of that when you say something, especially when you say a blessing or a prayer, or when you meditate on a mantra, that your entire being gets engaged, and that what you're doing can have a very deep impact on you, deep in your subconscious, way beyond consciously what you get out of it. It is easier to use the Shema as a meditation than the Amidah, since the main portion of the Shema consists of only 6 words, Shema Yisrael, which are easy to memorize. Before you can use these words as a meditation, you must know them well and by heart. You should be seated while saying the Shema and keep your eyes closed. Strive to be perfectly still with no body motion whatsoever. Okay, so again, he has said a few times, just to get started, you can say these Hebrew prayers in English, but that's just to get started, at least to make it meaningful. But it's really important that you put in the work. Oops. And the work here is learn Hebrew, learn some Hebrew. So learn the Shema. That part of it is 6 words. And learn the Hebrew and translate it, and then it'll have a much deeper impact. And seated, because as we've discussed, there's a protocol for saying the Shema, which is as seated, which is being seated. That's kind of like how we do it. But beyond that, as we've said before, when you're meditating, it's much easier to be seated. Standing meditation is, whoa, hold on. Standing meditation is that much harder. You've got to have the right position and mindset to be able to do that. So that's a whole different ballgame. And you're perfectly still with no body motion at all. You're the same kind of position we assume when we meditate: structured, not stiff, relaxed, no kinks in the hose. Okay. The Shema can be used as a meditation either as part of the regular services or alone. It is preferable to say it as part of the service, especially the morning service, which provides a proper setting and introduction to the Shema. In this service, the Shema is preceded by 2 prayers, or blessings, as the Talmud calls them. The first blessing begins with a description of the astronomical world. The mind soars to the sun, the moon, the stars, and beyond, and contemplates the vast reaches of space, immense beyond comprehension. Yet, while one meditates on the vastness of the astronomical world, one sees it as all working to do God's will. All right, so yeah, it's ideal to say this prayer in a minyan, in a tzibur. We enrich each other's powers. We add energy to one another's um, energy. We give strength to one another. But again, as we discussed last week, one of the challenges there is you're sitting there trying to treat the Shema as a meditation, and you're saying it 3 or 4 or 5 times longer than anybody else. So, you know, it's something you got to deal with. I have had no problem being a laggard and being behind everybody. It's most people don't treat it that way when they go to shul. So it's harder to treat it as a meditation. Okay, you got to figure it out. But what's also interesting is when he's talking about the bracha that talks about the cosmos, what's interesting about that is, remember, we're trying to connect and unify with this being of all beings. So, so it's interesting that the bracha before the Shema talks about the cosmos, because that helps us expand what we're thinking about and prime ourselves a little bit more to appreciate the endless being that God is, type of thing. The mind then transcends the astronomical world and reaches up to the spiritual realm, to the world of the angels. We join the angels in their daily praise to God. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole world is filled with his glory. And then, blessed be God's glory from his place. One's mind reaches higher and higher, joining the highest angels in their quest for the divine. So what's nice about this is that he's mentioning that the brachot, the blessings preceding the Shema, expand our thinking to appreciate heavenly beings, the heavens. So in their wisdom, the sages understood that you can't just like, all right, I'm going to start thinking about God now. There's a little bit of prep here, so that we can get in the mood, not just the mood, but that our brain can start looking heavenward, type of thing. And that enables us, to gives us the possibility of connecting with God and unifying when we actually get down to saying the Shema. Then one enters the second blessing, which speaks of the world of love. Here we meditate on the love that God has shown us and how he drew us close to him through the Torah and the commandments. We become aware of this love and meditate on it, drawing it into our innermost being. Then we recite the Shema itself. So that puts the giving of the Torah and Torah living into such a grand perspective, because it's almost like God saying, hey, I love you guys. And of course I love you, I'm going to give you a gift. Here's the Torah. Here's how you live on my planet. I'm giving it to you, type of thing. Those who learned Rabbi Foreman with us, when he talked about Teshukah, he talked about Teshukah being in the Torah, being this word that connotes something that has bounty, wanting to, out of love, help something that has less. God is everything. He gives us. We didn't have the Torah, now we got it, type of thing. And he talks about rain, having teshuka for the ground. Why? Because the rain is full of nourishment, and it falls to the ground, which needs the rain, and the ground benefits, type of thing. So God had teshuka. God said, hey, I love you guys. Take this Torah. When the Shema is said as part of the morning service, one automatically goes through all these levels. However, even if one says the Shema alone as meditation, one can go through all these levels as part of one's personal preparation. In either case, the Shema becomes not only a meditation, but a peak experience of love and closeness to God. Obviously, you keep working at it. He's kind of saying it's inevitable, that's the end result. The words immediately following the Shema are usually translated in the imperative, you shall love God, your Lord, implying that this is a commandment. However, the words can equally be translated as you will love God, your Lord, as a simple statement. The words imply that if we listen and hear the message that God is ours and that he is one, then we will automatically love God. Love for God follows as a natural consequence to the experience of his essence and unity. So that's also a really helpful teaching, because we in like the American culture have a sometimes a different understanding of the word will. You will do this. We say, all right, who you boss me around? What do you mean, I will do this? What Rabbi Kaplan is saying is his understanding from the sages and how they phrase the Shema is, you will do this because it's the inevitable consequence. It's, you can bank on it. You're going to get what you wanted. You're going to have this peak experience. You will do it. So it's there's great affirmation. So that's where he's coming from on that. All right, he's getting to a little bit mystical here, which I am not going to get into because we're not ready for it. I'm not ready for it. Yeah. He's wrapping up by saying that in Jewish mysticism, the mystics took a quick route to getting into a meditative state, and they basically used mantra meditation, vocalizing the different sounds of the Hebrew letters that comprise the Shema, which I'm not going to get into here because it's kind of advanced beyond the point we are in right now. And he wraps up by saying the Shema can be understood on many levels. However, as a meditation, the main thing is to allow the simple meaning of each word to penetrate the mind. One must understand the words, not with the intellect, but with the soul. Okay. So Rabbi Kaplan is using the word soul to describe that part of us that's deeper than intellect, deeper than the conceptual mind, deeper than the logic and analysis. He calls it the soul, okay, which is consistent because he's done that before. Okay. And that finishes the lesson on unification meditation. Now, we got a little bit of time. Let's look here. Mindfulness from a scientific point of view. I'm going to summarize this. If you've not heard of Mark Divine is one of the best teachers on the planet when it comes to growth. Mark Divine is called Commander Divine because he was a Navy SEAL commander. First of all, he was one of these MBA, CPA, go out and have a successful career kind of guys, and ready to take over the family business type of thing, and got involved with Zen meditation for a number of years. And it completely gave him a whole mind shift. And he goes, I don't want to be an MBA, CPA kind of guy. I want to grow. So he got heavily involved with yoga, got heavily involved with martial arts. I don't know which art, but he became a black belt. And then in his late 20s, I think it might even have been 30, joined the Navy SEALs. and became a trainer and commander of Navy SEALs. This guy was a top shelf guy. So so now I think he's in close to 50, maybe in his 50s. And he's been a very successful businessman. And he takes a lot of the principles and teachings of the Zen and the yoga and the martial arts and the Navy SEALs and business. And he has great and interesting discussions with experts in all these areas, experts of world renown. So I came across this one interview he did with a woman named Dr. Amishi Jha, who wrote a book, Peak Mind, Find Your Focus, Own Your Attention, Invest 12 minutes a day. And here's who she is: professor of psychology, director of contemplative neuroscience for the Mindfulness Research and Practice Initiative. Okay. So she's heavily into mindfulness. And he interviews her. And here's a summary of the interview. Neuroplasticity, the ability for our brains to change and grow new neurons, is possible at any age. When our minds are functioning at their peak, we have full control of 3 types of attention. Okay. Remember, we're talking about with Bhante, you're thinking of something, you're aware that you're thinking of something, like there's metacognition, She's talking about that. She's talking about what Bhante is talking about. Taking a bird's eye view allows us to observe where our attention is. Focus is going to wander, but through practice, we are able to bring the flashlight back to where we want it. All right, she's using the word flashlight for that recognition. Up, I just deviated from my focal point, I'm getting back. So she's come up with a metaphor calling that your brain's flashlights. Now the flashlight's shining on the right thing, which is your focal point. And by the way, regarding the first point, she defeats the myth like, I'm old, and my brain ain't what it used to be. She goes, nonsense. You can rejuvenate your brain when you're 85, 90 years old. Multitasking is a myth. Our brains are able to switch quickly between tasks, but that depletes energy. Sometimes it is a necessary part of life, but monotasking is much more efficient and should be the goal whenever possible. I'm a big believer in that. Multitasking is a joke. She says that there's a few times when you got to do it, but it's a lot of times it's an inefficient use of your energy. It gets you more tired and things like this. So in times of necessity, you do it, but she puts in a really good argument that your brain is just not wired to do that. And her last point is mindfulness training is transformative. Changes in brain activity are visible in functional MRIs, but it's important to remember that just as changes in the body take time, changes in the brain take time. Dr. Amishi Jha in her study, she saw results beginning after 4 weeks of training. So she's basically saying that if you do mindfulness training, such as the meditation we do in this class, you are giving your brain the workout it needs, and you're actually changing how your brain functions. So that when you say, I can concentrate better, for instance, because I've been doing this meditation, you basically are saying that you've made your brain sharper and better functioning. Just one last point about her. She's a very interesting woman. She's Indian, from India, but she was born here. Her parents were born in India and they immigrated here. And she tells a funny story that we were talking about last week or the week before. We were talking about how you got to be in an environment that supports you and what you're doing. And she was raised by meditators. She said her parents were meditating all the time, but she's like, oh, this stuff is bunk. I'm not going to do this stuff. I'm going to do my own thing. I'm in America. And she says something like she got so stressed out by med school that she lost all feeling of her teeth from all the grinding of the teeth she was doing from the stress of med school. And she's like, maybe my parents were onto something. So then she became a meditator and she started exploring it professionally. So she's really interesting. And she's appeared in all this other stuff. here is the link, and I wholeheartedly encourage you to listen to it. So it's on, as you know, we post the notes to each class on the website. You just open the notes, you click here, and then you're done. You're right there. Okay, so Bhante is going to talk about love too. Maybe the Beatles were right. All you need is love, right? Nope. Okay. Wait a minute. Okay, let's see. Sorry about that. I was on the wrong chapter. Wholesome state of mind, Bhante. This is interesting. He's putting out the idea of this. Deeply buried in the mind, there lies a mechanism that accepts what the mind experiences as beautiful and pleasant and rejects those experiences that are perceived as ugly and painful. This mechanism gives rise to those states of mind that we are training ourselves to avoid. Greed, hatred, aversion, and jealousy, and those kinds of things. We choose to avoid these hindrances, not because they are evil in the normal sense of the word, but because they are compulsive, because they take the mind over and capture the attention completely, because they keep going round and round in tight little circles of thought, because they seal us off from living reality. All right, a couple of things here. First of all, I think his wording is a little bit confusing. He says, well, first of all, he's saying that we're born with a mechanism that naturally accepts experiences that are beautiful and pleasant and rejects experiences that are perceived as painful and ugly. I can buy into that in the sense that your body, for instance, knows what's good for it and what's bad for it. If you listen to your body will say, this is terrible, I don't want this, whether it's a smell or a sound or a vibe, whatever it is. So he's taking that 5 steps further and basically saying, inside in our brain, we have the ability to accept it will accept or reject perceptions of what's going on with that same, like, it's not good for me type mechanism. So that's pretty interesting. All right, so having said that, so are there objective things that the brain's going to say, not for me, forget about it? And he says, yeah. He calls those hindrances. And the hindrances, greed, hatred, aversion, blah, 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 jealousy. He's saying those kinds of emotions we want to reject because they are compulsive. They take the mind over. So he says, and we don't want that to happen. He says our natural state is to want to control the thoughts in our mind. And so he's basically reinforcing what Rabbi Kaplan has said. Rabbi Kaplan has said, the goal of the meditation is to have complete control over the contents of your mind. And Bhante is saying that's our natural state. So I'm not sure if Rabbi Kaplan would say that, but be that as it may, we're shooting for the same target. Whether you consider it natural or something that you have to or achieve, either way, we're going for the same goal. So he's saying this mechanism inside of us that accepts or rejects something which tries to take over our attention, such as what he's calling these hindrances. So that kind of makes sense because if you think about it, there's certain emotions like overcome with anger, overcome with jealousy, overcome with hatred, out of control. Do people really get out of control with positive emotions? So I think there's kind of, I think that's kind of true. So he's saying that That's the way we work. And he's saying these hindrances cannot arise when mindfulness is present. So he's basically saying, once again, that mindfulness is the key, meaning, and we're going to finish this up for next week. He says, that's me being out of control jealous, or that's me being out of control angry, or that's me being really hateful. Wait a minute, I recognize that. So once you recognize that's what your state of mind, then it's like, all right, well, you diffuse the power of it. Yeah. Yeah. So I think what he's saying is right on. And it's very interesting that his mode of describing mindfulness gets into the actual mechanics of how we work here. All right, so we will elaborate more on this next week. Now we're going to meditate. Okay. Let us stop sharing. Margaret, no more recording, please.